who organized today's event, has kindly asked me to moderate and facilitate today's conversation, which is part of the Book to Action series here at the Edendale Branch Library. And Book to Action is basically a series of events that takes the basic book club concept and expands it. And so community members will read and discuss a book on a current topic, and they'll attend the series of events, and they'll put their knowledge, hopefully, into action by participating in community service or civic engagement projects. And so the book that has been chosen for this series is The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner, which I highly, highly recommend if you haven't already read it. And the topics that are going to be discussed with respect to this book are mass incarceration, and of course the title of today's panel is Mass Incarceration and the Challenges of Reentry. And I think Rachel is going to be here, is it June 3rd, Angie?
Yes.
June 3rd. So Rachel Kushner will be here on the evening of June 3rd. So I thought I would just begin by introducing my friends and fellow panelists, saying a little bit about each of them and their backgrounds. And then we'll sort of launch the conversation with some general questions and ask them to each sort of respond to some questions that I have, and then hopefully we'll open it up and have a broader discussion with all of you. So to my left is Tim Kornegay. Am I saying that correct?
Yes.
So Tim Kornegay has served as a canvassing consultant and a field team lead for the African American Voter Registration, Education, and Participation, where he does disenfranchised and low propensity African American system impacted voter registration, and has netted over 3,000 new registrations.
Woohoo!
All right. And he is the Justice Transformation and Voter Engagement Organizer at LA Voice, a very critical organization, which focuses on social justice. And since being released in 2015 and joining LA Voice, he has led teams of formerly incarcerated individuals in civic engagement and voter education campaigns. And these campaigns have been really instrumental in passing historic legislation to empower underserved communities. Tim also works with numerous coalition organizations to help end mass incarceration while increasing rehabilitation statewide. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
And over on Tim's left, we have Billy Taing, who's a former lifer who was incarcerated for 21 years. And before his incarceration, he was a member of the U.S. Army National Guard. And during his time in prison, he took advantage of many rehabilitation programs, including meditation. And he obtained an AA degree in general studies and embraced meditation practices. He and his family are refugees from Cambodia. When Billy was a toddler, his father was murdered by the Khmer Rouge during the height of the ethnic cleansing campaign in that country. And his family was then placed in a labor camp for 3.5 years until his mother escaped with him and his older brother to the border of Thailand. And Billy's family temporarily resettled in Georgia. And since his re-entry back into society in 2016, he has strived to be a productive member of his community. He is active in several nonprofit organizations, including the Asian Pacific Islander Reentry and Inclusion through Support and Empowerment, also known as API RISE, another wonderful organization, where he serves as the outreach coordinator. And he also does plenty of advocacy for immigration reform. So welcome.
Yes, Billy!
And again, I'm Farah Godrej from the University of California, Riverside, and I have had the tremendous privilege of getting to know both Billy and Tim and several other folks who are actually in the audience who we hope to give a shout out to later in our program. In the course of the research and study that I have been doing on the phenomenon that we now know of as mass incarceration. And so it's been my great privilege to work with these individuals, to interview some of them, to get to know their stories, and to really learn about how it is that this incredibly unjust and broken system called mass incarceration is able to perpetuate itself. And that's something that I'm hoping that we'll achieve through today's event, which is really bring people out of the shadows, right? And to really destigmatize incarceration so that we can all understand that, you know, this is a system that disproportionately incarcerates minorities and immigrants, disproportionately incarcerates people on the basis of things like race and poverty, right? So that it's really set up as fundamentally unequal and unfair and unjust. And so part of what I hope we can do with this series of events is to draw attention to that fundamental injustice that dictates, right, who gets incarcerated, and hopefully say a little bit more about, right, what it means to encounter the system and to survive it. So without further ado, let's jump right into our conversation. And so I thought that I would start off by asking each of you to describe a little bit your own experience, your own encounter with this phenomenon that we call mass incarceration, and how it affected you and your families. And so, anything you want to say about that, please.
I think the first thing that I would say is the system is not broken. The system works exactly the way it was designed to work. It's a part of our society, and it creates economic development for folks who are neither black or brown. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. My experience with the system is when I was young, I did like everybody else did, I snuck off the porch. When I snuck off the porch, I was met by a society that was hostile towards who I was and what I looked like. And the information that I received prompted me to accept options that would lead to my eventual incarceration. So when I got to my first experience with jail, I was well prepared. It was not shocking because I was built for it. My experience through incarceration, and though I look kind of young, I'm not as young as I look. I've done a total of 30 years in prison. And that's not counting the stays and jails and juvenile halls and YAs. That's 8 years the first time, 22 years the second time. What I learned in prison once I realized that I was a tool for the system is something was wrong with me internally because I had accepted that it was a reasonable consequence of who I was. And in doing that, I had to start to examine not what was wrong with prison, but what was wrong with the society and an environment that gave birth to a place that commodified my misery. And did I want to continue to be a tool of, or did I want to learn how to be a tool against? So what I would like folks to know about prison, it is an underground empire. It is staffed by individuals who don't even realize they're profiting from folks' misery. And I'm gonna say that again, it is staffed by. The administration on the higher levels knows exactly what prison is and what prison is for. But those who are the gatekeepers to the warehouse, they have no idea what they're doing to folks. They have no idea how they rob individuals of their humanity every single day, because they too have accepted that there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. They're trying to feed their families. They're trying to live the American dream, but the American dream is flawed if it results in an American nightmare for an individual like myself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My encounter with the system. As stated, I came here, me and my family came here as refugee immigrants, and I was 5 years old at the time when I first got here, and just coming to a new place and in a new land, and just everything was just foreign to me. And growing up, I just struggle, right, to struggle to grasp the culture of the Western and the Eastern. When I went to school, I learned what was taught at school. When I came home, I learned, what was taught by my mom, which, was taught by her mom. And, our culture at home is, work hard, right, study hard, and that's expected, right? And that's what a son should do, or a daughter, or, a kid should do for the parents, to honor the parents. And I did that. As a kid growing up, I was like the obedient son. I didn't express myself too much. I just did what I was told. However, there was something that I felt like I was suffocating a little bit, right? Because at school I was allowed to just hang out and express myself a little bit and just be among my peers, which is a lot of times the Asian community. So I grew up with like people that are similar to similar backgrounds and beliefs as I do. So eventually it's just I got to the point where it was more I like hanging out with my friends. That allowed me the freedom. That allowed me to express myself, and that sense of belonging, that sense of acceptance, right, eventually led me to just more of a destructive path because we're all like-minded people, and we gravitate towards the same goals, which is just do what's necessary, to have fun and just to kind of brush our pains or hurt, that was going through, and we just didn't know how to express it or deal with it at the time. So at age 19, I got myself in trouble, made terrible decisions, and I was incarcerated. And at the time, it was during in the mid-90s, so it was during the time when there was like a huge explosion of incarceration, right? Everybody was just 3 strike and you're out, the mandatory sentence, gun enhancement, gang enhancement, anything that they could throw at you, they throw it at. So at age 19, pretty much I was looking at multiple life sentence, going through the county system. That was my first exposure to the justice system, right? Directly, I was put in a gang module and pretty much packed as a tuna. What's supposed to be like a 4-man cell ended up being like an 8-man cell, a 6-man cell being a 10-man cell. So, we're pretty much at the time it was just we're the product, right? We're just, I guess that's where it started, warehousing people, right? So by the time I spent 18 months in the county, by the time I got to state, there was like, I don't know how many prisons was built, but at least there was like a 4 or 5 maximum security prison that was built, ready to houses. I remember getting to my first cell. I was the first one in my cell at the time, and I was 21 years old. And I was thinking at the time, like, man, I was sentenced to, life plus 14-year consecutive. The judge at the time stated that he didn't trust the parole board with my sentence, and even at that time, the parole rate was like 0.1%. And even then, it's like, well, he bragged that he was showing me mercy by not giving me, 5 life sentences or of that sort. But yeah, that's what I remember, and I was in like a state of like despair, like how am I gonna do this whole time, 21 years, or life plus 14 years and 8 months, and I just didn't think nothing of it. I mean, it's either 1, give up, or 2, keep fighting. And at the time, I think I was, my family was the main source of, my inspiration to go on, because at the time I realized the harm that I caused them, right? It immediately hit me, and my goal was to, since I can't be out there for my mom, my family, at least I could do is just do what I can and not hurt them anymore while I'm in prison. But at the same time, I know that in the environment I had to survive. So at 21 years old, instead of attending college, I was learning what's the best way for me to make a weapon. How should I deal with a situation if a bigger guy approached me? What should I do? And the only thing to do is, take action, and that's what I learned as 21 years old. And of course, I'm no stranger, being in that gang environment, right? That I'm no stranger to violence, but being there and being new to the system and maximum security, it just perpetuates that to a high level, right? I have to survive ultimately, and I can't show weakness. I don't hang around with who I'm told to hang around with. So I'm taught to walk a fine line, and yeah, that was my experience with mass incarcerations. I went into a time where the explosion of incarceration was just at its peak, really. We went from 13 prison to 32 prison in 5 years, right, or less.
Thank you both for sharing your perspectives. And it's really important, I think, Tim, that you began, that you launched us off by reminding us that, this is not a broken system. This is a system that is doing exactly what it is meant to do, which is take those of us that our society doesn't want to deal with, is hostile to, and make them invisible and throw them away, right? The poor, the unemployed, the black and brown, the immigrants, the refugees, the mentally unwell, the homeless, right? That this is where our society puts them and makes them invisible by design, right? So it's often also referred to as the prison industrial complex, right? So I'd like us to keep that also in the back of our mind as we keep talking about this. And so I thought maybe I would ask each of you then to say something about how long you've been out and describe what some of the early moments of reentry have been like for you.
I consider myself to be an exception to the rule. And the reason why is I got free in prison, like intellectually and spiritually, long before it was time for me to get free physically, because I had the understanding that if I returned to my community, to society, with any portion of who I was when I came to prison, I was coming back. So the first thing for me was to figure out how to survive my own idiocy. So I outpaced my desire to, I don't know how to actually phrase it, but it's like a reverse suicide. That the pain that I carried with me hurt so much that I could never do it to myself. But I was behaving in a way that it might cause somebody to bring me harm. And once I realized that I was on that path, then I knew I had to change. I knew I had to change. So my journey through prison, the first half of the 22-year sentence that I just recently completed in 2015, I was my old self. So I engaged in all the negative behavior. I vowed not to be anybody but the person I was when I got to prison. So I was into drugs, I was into violence, anything that was going on, I was into, but I was also anti-administration, not but because of my political beliefs, but just because I just hate authority. I just hate individuals telling me what to do. So I lived in like both worlds, in the worst of prison and the best of prison, because my strength, my political beliefs shifted the prison environment in a lot of prisons that I was in, but I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. So once I realized that transformation was absolutely necessary, I started taking on the ingredients of freedom in prison, realizing that the structure only had my body, but there was nothing keeping me from growing mentally. There was nothing keeping me from growing spiritually, and that's the journey that I started taking prior to getting free. So once I got free, the shock component was, to give you an example, I was driving, I was on the freeway with my wife at the time, and I was getting angry. And the reason why I was getting angry is because there was nothing physical I could attach to the 22 years that I had just done. it felt like I went to sleep one day, woke up, got on the freeway, and 22 years later, I was on the freeway again. And for the life of me, I could not make that make sense. Like, how can you not hold on to the tangibleness of 22 years spent in captivity? And that was like my struggle as far as like family support, housing, relationships, because I had a phone for like 12 years in prison. So I had contact with my family. I had developed relationships. I had created what we call leaving prison a smooth landing. So I had none of the struggles. My struggles were internally because I wanted to make who I was opposed to who I had become make sense in a new world that I was absent from, and tried to figure out how to integrate myself back into a society that, might be hostile to all that time I had done. And then I had an epiphanal moment, and all this is on the freeway, is that I didn't have to be anybody different than the person I had always been. I just had to do it for the right reasons. So to the consternation of my wife at the time, I was like, pull over. She was like, what? I'm like, I don't need you to drive me around. She was like, you've been in prison for 20, you don't know. I'm like, man, pull over. I got this. And that was like the acceptance of my reentry. I drove the rest of the way, and that was my way of taking command over the life I wanted to live. I immediately started developing relationships with folks who were involved in the community. I immediately took like the ability I had developed to oppose systems and started presenting it like this is what I was doing in prison. So I didn't actually have to be any different. But that makes me the exception to the rule, because it's difficult for a lot of us to establish that way of being before we come home.
Try not to be too, in those interest of time. But for me, is I supposedly was supposed to parole on January 27th of 2016. However, on that day, instead of paroling to my family, to society, I paroled to immigration detention center. So pretty much I was handed over to another authority from 21 years. But in my mind, I accepted that, because I'm thinking, you know what, at least I'm out of CDCR, and no matter where I go, it's freedom. So I ended up staying in the detention center the first time for 4 months. At the time, Cambodian government didn't entertain of accepting me, right? First of all, I'm not a Cambodian citizen, and they're not. It's in their culture, we're considered like just like the bad seed, so they don't want to take any bad seed, right? So I was released, back in society, and I went to transition housing. That was my parole plan before being released. That was the condition that had to set out. For me, adjusting to the speed technology, right, was a little challenging. I find myself just, even with technology like the GPS, guiding myself to go back to my transit. I got lost twice, and the house was just right in front of me. I walked by like 2 times. I'm still looking for, because it wasn't walls. It's houses. I'm so used to looking at walls, fence, right, and although houses are different, to me it's like they're a strange object, right? I can't find my place until and then I just felt stupid, right? And I guess that institutionalized, I find myself still asking for permission, to go restroom, right? Oh, can I use the restroom? And people looking at me like, is this guy really asking me to go restroom? And because we're so used to just asking for, from the guards or from, and yeah, and that was that mental incarceration that it carried me upon my. But fortunately, I think I have the desire to learn, right? To just explore and to not let my circumstances trap me. So I started getting involved with a lot of organizations, anti-racism coalitions, API Rise, Second Call, DeFi Ventures. So anything that I felt that I could learn from, and I can just be in an environment where I'm accepted, right? Because those environments, they're accepting, people that's formerly incarcerated. So I feel like, okay, these are the environment that will accept me. So I still have that, mental, like, what, if people find out that, I've been incarcerated, what would they think? And, so it was just my own mental trap. But just to gradual being involved, I gained a lot of the support of the community, and I realized that, these folks are here for me, the support, and I feel like, just a sense of embrace and welcome, and whatever I thought while I was in there was just got pushed aside gradually. So through their support, that's the reason why I'm here. I was detained again when Trump took office. Immediately he wanted to deport everybody that had a conviction, and it didn't matter that Cambodia didn't want me. They were just their way of forcing Cambodia to take people was apply diplomatic sanction, and and I was re-detained a little over a year ago. I should say October of 2017. So I find myself, back in the detention center, right? And this time it was like, you know what? This is it. I'm not gonna be in the United States anymore. I'm just gonna get deported, because a lot of people was getting deported. But through the support of communities, organizations, right? It kept me going, because at one point I thought to myself, well, if these people fight so hard for me to stay here, then I should fight also to stay here myself, and not just for myself, for my family, for community. So, we started fighting. A lot of circumstances that happened, I don't want to go into a lot of details, that allowed me to be here, and, organization support, and I vowed, while I was in there, if I ever get a chance to come back out, that I would do something about this injustice of separating family, of putting a person in the position of just the hopeless environment. So when I got out, that's what I did, right? I went out to share my story more, got involved, and just do it, right? Be present, just show up, and that's pretty much what I've been doing. Even though it's, a lot of times I don't feel comfortable, but it's like, you know what? I have to do this. I have to just, weather through this, and being uncomfortable is part of life. I mean, that's how I learned, right? So, but yeah.
Great, thank you. I actually remember this whole period that you're describing, because I got to know Billy shortly after he was first released from being incarcerated, but soon after we got to know each other, he was then detained, and for a while I remember corresponding with him while he was in immigration detention, and then sort of following your story and following your release, and so it's very, very poignant for me to remember all of those ups and downs that you're describing. So both of you have actually started making reference to what I was going to ask you to talk about next, which is something that I have, most of my learning about mass incarceration has been through my studying and kind of academic engagement, but also I'm also a volunteer in prisons. I work with organizations that volunteer to offer yoga and meditation in prisons, and so I've learned something about our incarceration system, of course still as a kind of outsider, but one of the things that I've learned and that I'm so struck by is the way in which our society legalizes discrimination against formerly incarcerated individuals. And so that's one of the tremendous contradictions of mass incarceration, which is on the one hand, right, people are told that they have to quote unquote pay their debt to society, and then they pay their debt and they come out and they find that actually they're still not good enough, right? They haven't paid their debt, right? They're still going to be punished after they've been punished. And so I wanted to ask each of you, maybe if you could comment a little bit on how that has shown up for you, in what ways have legalized discrimination against ex-incarcerated people shown up in your lives?
I think because of the system that is working the way it's supposed to, and they control the narrative, they inadvertently stigmatize folks, especially when they create these terms that are supposed to be different than ex-convict or parolee, and they try to make it sexy, saying, or you're a returning citizen, or your system impacted, which is the exact same thing. It doesn't change the response that you get from folks when they hear, oh yeah, I'm system impacted, then all of a sudden, psychologically, there's all these things associated with what that could possibly be. So how it impacts me, or rather how I impact it, I never tell individuals, unless it's an environment like this, that I'm formerly incarcerated first. I let them feel who I am and then tell them, oh, by the way, you know, I've been in prison. And so they can deal with the shock of, and that's not what I expected. But if you lead with I'm system impacted, then you set folks up in their head to think a particular way. It's all about us being the best of who we can be. And if you need to know, then you'll know. But if not, then I'm not going to cripple myself. Nobody should cripple themselves with the lead-in or believe that that's an actual, it is a disadvantage perceptually, but if a person owns what they can become, it is not a disadvantage, it's an obstacle, but it's not an obstacle that cannot be overcome.
I think from my own experience, the challenges of immigration, right, also sets in. Those that are a similar situation, and then we checked in periodically through ICE, and each time we checked in, there's always a possibility that we'll never check out, right? And that uncertainty is always, for me, it kind of like I wanted to go on and set goals and for my future, but at the same time, I also understand that I might not be here long, and so I can only do what I can at the present moment. And for us, we're not even eligible for certain governmental programs because we're immigrants and we don't have, according to them, we don't have legal documents. So we don't enjoy the privilege of even with jobs. I need to obtain work permits, and that could take 6-7 months, right? And in the meantime, what I do, if I don't have family support or organization support, what do I do? Fortunately, I do have that support, and that support was enough for me to get by, but not really enough for me to realistically plan my future here in the United States. And I'm talking to a lot of people that's checked in with immigration. It's just every time they go in, it's the fear, that uncertainty of whether they're gonna get detained, whether it's just the last day that they're gonna see their family, right? Those are the challenges that, and for us, it's more, we did our time like everybody else. Why can't we resume a normal life like all parolees, right? We got to check in with parole, and then we got to check in with the ICE official. So, it doesn't matter that I served this country when I was right out of high school, right? That doesn't, that doesn't count according to, our government. So, yeah, for me it was that challenge, and I could speak for thousands of others that's, have that deportation order.
Thank you. So it seems like this is a good moment for us to kind of open up the conversation, because it might be best if we sort of direct the conversation in response to the questions that people have, and I see some people who kind of want to get into the conversation, and so I'd love to open it up, and as we open it up, I'd really like to recognize and invite some of our friends who are in the audience who are formerly incarcerated to share their stories, of course only if that's something you'd like to do, and to really kind of mark this as a safe space. right? A space in which, right, anybody who has been through some of the challenges that these guys are describing can sort of safely sort of share and be acknowledged. So I invite you all to you know, jump in with questions, comments, sharing, anything you like. And I think I saw a hand in the back there, so please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oceana, and I'm 32. I was incarcerated in, let me see, the beginning of 2017. I did a year of traveling back and forth from St. Thomas, Puerto Rico, to California, back and forth, fighting my case. Finally, they sentenced me to a year, and I went on and turned myself in, and going through being transferred from state to state, then eventually to the islands, it was a bit much because obviously I went through being exposed to other women that were going through situations with ISIS and having to, you know, see what their status was because they had been out here for so long and they didn't even know if they was like, you know, for sure that they could be here or if they was gonna go home. I actually met several women that was able to stay, and that was just by God's grace and mercy because they had children that were citizens. But for the most part, if their children wasn't citizens, they was on their way back home and their kids was out here and they had to figure out what life would be like for their kids out here while they're going back home to somewhere they probably have never even been before, you know, because most of them left home when they was babies, and it's just unfortunate that that was the situation, that they have to go back to somewhere that was honestly foreign to them. And not only that, but just me with my own experience, it looked like it wasn't a walk in the park because, you know, you get there and I had several marshals come up to me in California as well as in Puerto Rico, and I guess they must have went over my transcripts and it was like, oh, you said you was too cute to go to jail because that was in my paperwork, and I was like, you know, my demeanor is different now because yeah, I felt like that when I first got caught up. Of course, I felt like that. Yeah, I'm too cute. What are y'all touching me for? Leave me alone. I got things to do. But I had to accept it for what it was, and I went through it. And you know, having the marshals once I'm finally in their possession, and I ain't got on jewelry now. I don't got on the clothes that I had on when y'all caught me. I'm like everybody else now, and they can just address me however they want to. And it's like, you gotta humble yourself. You gotta really change who you are to adapt to that society. And it was like crazy. It wasn't even realistic to me. It was so unrealistic to me to the point where I didn't call home. I did not call home for months, days, and it wasn't that I did not have commissary, because when you were in the feds, you have no choice but to keep commissary if you want to get on the phone, even if you want toilet tissue. So the resources wasn't a problem. It was the thing that I felt like I had disgraced my family. I felt like I had disgraced my child. Felt like I disgraced myself. Being a person that have a beauty pageant experience, I felt like I disgraced everything that I stood for, and it was just like I just was embarrassed. I didn't want to talk about it. I just said, you know what, I gotta go through it on my own, and that was my whole mentality throughout the whole thing. I stayed strong, but it was like I had to go through it on my own. And my biggest fear was coming home and not being accepted. That was my biggest fear, and it was because it was just like, first of all, you know, you're not innocent no more. Once you plead guilty to a charge, you're no longer innocent. You know what you're doing. So it was like, I know what I did. I know, you know, I got myself into this, and it was like, wow, you know, what about when I get back out and I'm trying to get into the working world, and you know, technology is different. Back then, people wasn't able to get on their phone and Google who you are and see whatever it is they want to know about you. Now today, you can go on a job interview and somebody just gonna pull your name up and they can see your convictions and everything. So imagine me, I'm out here just being, now I'm trying to be, I wanna forget that. This is no longer me. And every day of my life, still, and I take it differently now because I do counseling, but everybody's always asking me about my conviction. And I'm like, damn, I don't wanna have to address that issue every time I step out. But I've learned to take it with a grain of salt and, take me as I am or leave me alone. And, no, I'm not afraid of it. And, but, I had to put it in my mind, I'm not gonna let this overcome me and I'm not gonna let this get the better of me. I mean, but in my experience, I see that this system has this way of still, even if you've overcame it, they remind you that you are who you are, which is a criminal. For example, my PO came over the other day and she's like, yeah, did you register as a narcotics offender? I said, you know what? Isn't it enough that I already have people, when I'm looking for jobs, already wanting to Google me and see what it is that I was doing within the last 2 years? Is that not enough? Is it not enough that I'm already being breached? I got an Airbnb once upon a time, maybe like a couple months ago, and I had the owner of the house tell me he Googled my reputation, so he knows what I'm about. And I'm like, I said, excuse me, what did that mean? And it was just like, okay, and y'all, they don't understand when they have us come home and they tell us, go get a job, go do this, but then here go these stipulations or here go these certain requirements you must meet with us so you can be cool on our side. They're not thinking when you step out into society, these people really taunt you and mess with you about your convictions. And, luckily for me, it was the encouragement of my mother, it was the encouragement of my daughter, it was the encouragement of my grandmother. My grandmother was a Black Panther, so, she's all into rights and stuff. So with their encouragement, it was just kind of like, you could either, you let it affect you for the rest of your life, or you gonna push past it. And it was like, now I came up with this philosophy, I went through it, I go through it so I could grow through it, and I keep that always, this is something that I have to program with myself. You went through it so you can grow through it. You went through it so you can grow through it. God don't put you through anything that He don't allow you to get some experience for. We are teachers, so maybe I went through this, maybe it was me who went through it, just so that I can teach other people that it's a rainbow on the other side. And although the trials may seem hard and it seems like it's a never-ending battle, because for me, I feel like that sometimes. It's days that I want to break down and cry. And it's not that I'm not happy that I'm free, it's the fact that I still have to answer to these people and I don't like it, and I don't like them dictating what I do. But, I accept it with a grain of salt, and I just, I do things to wisen myself so that I can be an overcomer of it, and so I can be able to minister to other young women that are not familiar but going through some of the same similarities of the issues. And so I can just encourage them, because I do have people that call me all the time breaking down, and I'm like, girl, it's not bad as being in Puerto Rico where you don't know a lick of Spanish and you got all of these girls speaking Spanish and you just want to stay to yourself and pray and read your Bible, and everybody is looking at you like, oh, so you read the Bible? Yeah, I read the Bible. Oh, you read the Bible? You wasn't reading the Bible when you caught your case. That's not your business. I read my Bible. Chill out. So, I mean, it's a different walk, and I experienced it, and it was hard, but it's still hard. But every day, I'm always doing things to encourage myself, such as this class. It was nice. It was good to hear that these two gentlemen went through some of the same things that I went through. I watched women go through it, and women going through it, it's way worse. We have kids. We separated from our kids. So you could just imagine how many women that I came across was going through children's services, being involved in their business because they went to jail now. So, I mean, just wanted to share my testimony, because somewhere down the way, I needed to get this out. I have at least 5 more months of probation and I'm completed. But you know, I needed to close this chapter for good and get this out so this won't suck me up. And so I can grow from it.
Thank you for sharing your story. Julia, I invite whoever would like to jump in, please.
Hi, I have a question. There's been a movement towards closing down juvenile facilities, like LA County's thinking about it, San Francisco's gonna do it. I think I know the answer, but what is your opinion about, can this happen for adult facilities and why not? And also, how can we change this?
So when you're talking about closing down facilities, you're talking about county jails?
Yes.
Okay. And did you say juvenile specifically or
Well,
adult?
there's a movement to, like, LA County's
Yeah.
reassessing their juvenile facilities, and San Francisco's reassessing to
Right.
close down their juvenile.
There's
halls.
also a movement in LA to build a new county jail.
Yes, yes.
But,
Yeah, but, so,
Right.
why don't you see that with adults? I think I know why, and how can we stop the building, not stopping the building of prisons, but stop sending people to prison?
I'll answer the last part first. You can stop it. But what we tend to do as a society, and it's not intentional, but we look at individuals who have these challenges and we feel like, but for the grace of, that could be me. And when you do that, you separate yourself from that struggle and other individuals, and you move away from that because you don't want to be part of it. What's important is to understand that the prisons in this country look the way that they do because we allow them to look the way that they do. That we don't demand institutions of healing or rehabilitation. We accept punishment because the narrative is individuals have done something and they deserve to be punished, not realizing that these are sending folks back that are broken and they haven't had an opportunity to heal. So at any time that you want to get involved, you can contact individuals from the city to the county, your state representatives, and say, I, as a person living in this society, think that this system is broken and y'all need to get on your job and change that.
Pretty much gave us that.
Well, I was going to add to that actually by saying, so one of the books I really strongly recommend, if you haven't already looked at it, is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And one of the things I learned from reading this book is how much power DAs have in shaping, right, the system, primarily through something called prosecutorial discretion, which is that DA offices decide who is going to be charged, how, right, and for how long. All of that gets decided at the DA level, and I've been reading recently about this movement of new progressive DAs. There's a whole crop of DAs across the country who are basically pledging to incarcerate less and demanding that their staffs get on board, and anybody who's not on board is out. And so I would say a lot of this has to happen at the local level, and one of the things I think we have to address is prosecutorial discretion, and we have to address mandatory minimum sentencing laws. Some of that has to be legislative, and some of that has to be, right? Do you want to?
She had a second part of her question that she asked about the building of jails and how that's going. In terms of LA County, though, the Board of Supervisors wanted 2 new jails built because of coalition efforts. There will be no 2 new jails. What they will build is a facility that's structured around mental health. Unfortunately, it will have a sheriff component, but it won't be upside down, 90% sheriff, 10% mental health. It'll be a primarily 90% a mental health facility for folks that need those, that have those needs that be addressed, and the other will be the sheriff's. As far as the juvenile system, it is closing down, but not only is it closing down, the governor of California has decided that this is a health and safety issue and not a criminal issue. So the juvenile reform is being shifted to a different portion of the government that's not punitive.
And I
I would say the other add-on to that is stop electing tough on crime candidates politically. That's something I think we can all participate in, right? Like legislatively, there's less we can do, but electorally, do not elect candidates who claim to be quote unquote tough on crime. It just means more mass incarceration. I saw a hand in the back. Sir.
Yes. My name is Philip Berkey, and unfortunately, I was part of that system. So my question is to Mr. Tim and Billy Tim, is that each one of you served over 20 years in prison. What did you do prior, the moment that you were in incarceration, and while you were incarcerated, what did you do to rehabilitate yourself that the system didn't do for you?
For me, it's just, I think when I saw that there was a little spark of hope at the end of the tunnel, right? I focused on reaching that, and in doing so, I really put myself in a position to take advantage of the rehabilitation programs that those offer, and I think it was more of my determination, right, to go home to my family. And when I was transferred to a lower level, I saw that a lot of people was going home, and for me it was like, well, if these people go home, I could go home also. And that's just putting my perspective in a different direction, whereas now I have a focus, right? And through a lot of programs that I've was involved with, and even with the education programs that at the time I've taken the class sociology, I think it allows me to understand, right, that, you know, I can take a shift in a different direction, and acknowledging that, you know, my past behavior, or my, you know, it was all me, right? Taking accountability for my actions, and from there it's like, okay, you know, what can I do now? And a lot of programs that I attended, it helped me to understand, you know, what happened, and gain the insight into, like, or reflect back into how did I became that person, right? And just a matter of fact, it was just reversing that, you know, like Tim was mentioning early, reverse suicide, you said? Yeah. So I could totally relate to that. And just through the process, it's just, you know, my transformation is, Tim mentioned earlier, understanding or finding my spirituality. I credit meditation to, as far as understanding and being mindful, and you know, allow me to reflect. And yeah, I think a lot of well, for me, I did a lot of soul searching, and, you know, it just came to a conclusion that in order for me to be a different person, I have to change the way I think.
For my rehabilitation, and far as the system is concerned, the system wasn't equipped to rehabilitate an individual like me. I had to do it on my own. So the things that I needed, I created and brought individuals in the circle to share it with them. So when I feel like I had anger management issues, I created programs, whether they were on the surface through the administration, or whether they were through some underground venue that we all could benefit from. In terms of, like, the necessary social reacclimation, I knew that the institutions that I were in didn't have that component, so I studied what it would take and created groups, once again, whether it was accepted by the administration or it was in an underground venue, and we learned in groups when it came to, like, basic life skills, same thing, child psychology, the understanding of self. The institution didn't have those things in place, so I would create them so I could rehabilitate me and help rehabilitate others like me, because I knew that that is like something that we needed. And in terms of, like giving me the ability to express myself. I've always had a sense of pride in wanting to do that, but not knowing how that would go forward, being back in the real world. Once again, I created a creative writing class and brought individuals into it, and so we could learn together. And I sat across tables with the best debaters and some of the evilest individuals on the planet and argue the points of growth. It's one of them in here right there, Jabari Shroud.
There you go.
And had the conversations with them like, bro, this, if we want to survive, if we want to be able to reintegrate, these are the things that we need to know. And would have the pushback. Well, like, well, this is not gonna work. Well, if that doesn't work, these are the things that we need to do. So I was educating and learning at the same time. And in the moments that I was in some institutional form of rehabilitation, because of the kind of individual I would go into the program and help them redesign it, letting them know that if I'm not an alcoholic, I don't need AA. If I don't use cocaine, I don't need cocaine. My addiction was criminality. What do you have for a criminal addiction for somebody that gets off on the adrenaline of doing the things that they do? And when they didn't have it, me and individuals would create a component and invite others in and change the dynamic of the rehabilitative structure.
Okay, and also on that point, what steps are needed for a person who's coming out of prison to be reintegrated back into society? I mean, you did 20 years, both of you did over 20 years. And an individual is coming out who's been 10 years in also, or a lifer per se. And they just released 20 lifers within this 10 to 15 years time period. He's been incarcerated all those times, institutionalized, like you said, Mr. Billy. But what step for that person to come out if he doesn't have family support?
My first suggestion would be find out the available networks of churches in the community that you've paroled to, and see if you can establish a relationship with the churches. From there, find other community-based organizations whose focus, or their real focus, is helping individuals reintegrate, and let that be your starting point. Because there are some good organizations out there, and there are some churches open to helping an individual, but you have to seek them out in the community to which you parole to.
And that's a great question, actually. I was going to ask both of you to comment on what resources, and if there are other folks in the audience who want to contribute to this, what resources and recommendations do we have for those who are facing reentry challenges? So one idea you gave us is churches, but other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think for me, through chances or through a word of mouth, I found organizations that was specialized in reentry. Organizations such as Anti-Racism Coalition, ARC, that's their main focus. And for me also was, before, like Tim was mentioning, before we hit society, I had a plan, right? I made a plan, like short-term plans, medium range, and long-term plans. And I think it's good to have that in place, right? Because that's kind of like a little roadmap to guide you. Whether for me, like, all right, I'm gonna seek support, community support. How can I go about that? And as a matter of coming out and doing research, asking questions, and really just be ready for opportunity that's available. I think there's a lot of reentry organizations that's funded to help formerly incarcerated coming out, but I think individuals just have to be prepared, right, and seek that also.
I would just say that there is in the course of my work with formerly incarcerated individuals, I have put together a list of local organizations that I have found that works specifically on reentry for formerly incarcerated individuals, and the two biggest challenges I hear people ask about are housing and employment, right? Those are the two main things. And there are some organizations that I have on my list that I'm happy to share with folks. And the other thing I would just say is we need to act politically to end legalized discrimination against ex-offenders. I mean, that's the biggest thing is legalized discrimination in employment and housing, right? And if we can ban the box and literally legislatively and electorally defeat these kinds of measures, I think that will go a long way towards. So I see a few other hands in the back. Please go ahead.
Okay, so, I don't know, so I feel like we should start with the youth.
Just
So-
a little louder, please.
So I feel like we should start with the youth, like in my opinion, just so, they don't like fall into like criminal ways. So my question to you guys is, how do you think something would have helped you guys pass, like, you know, some of the kids? Like, what would have helped you not get like those, I don't know, just specific answer, but your opinion.
I don't want to sound extreme, but this is something that I think about all the time. Had I not been born and projected into an environment of killers, let me state that again, and then I'm gonna clarify. If I had not been born and projected into an environment of killers, and killers come in the form of people saying, you can't do that, and you kill folks' dreams. They're going to discriminate against you, so you shouldn't participate in. And all these you can'ts, you shouldn't. We don't realize that with each time we do that, we are inadvertently becoming killers and setting these kids up for failure, not instilling in them the confidence that I can do anything. We are in a country where we never thought we would see a black president. But we also live in a country that did not instill confidence in black and brown kids to believe that I can do that. So we have to work on eliminating that inadvertent trigger we pull. And if somebody is doing something that's extremely creative but kind of crazy, don't tell them. Don't tell these kids, hey, sit your behind down and don't do that. Say, hey, wait a minute, let's figure out how to structure that. You have a talent. When your kid has ADHD and he or she won't sit themselves down, don't put them on those psychotropic drugs. Say, let's go outside and go run around the block. Let's do something, activity to utilize that energy, because that energy could be the creativity that gives birth to the belief that they can be the next president, that they can be the next doctor, that they can be the next lawyer, and not think that all I can be is what I see in my immediate environment.
Yeah, I think school systems plays a big role. I feel that as a kid in grade school, for me it's just teachers just teaching curriculums, right, and not really paying attention to kids or individual kids. And I think maybe training teachers to be more mindful of just individual kids, like recognize symptoms or recognize any trouble behaviors, right? And it has to start and at a very young age also, not wait until high school, right? So I think Jabal wants.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
My name is Jabbar. I'm formerly incarcerated. Been out about 8 months now. To that point, that's one of the challenges that I'm trying to meet in terms of cultivating, what we call diminished aspirations. You spoke on teachers. I think that's important as well. But I think as a community, I think we got to take on that challenge as well. And we trying to bring outside, like after-school programs and stuff like that, not just to reiterate curriculum. Because I know when I was a child, a lot of the stuff I learned in school, I was like, what the hell am I using this stuff for? You know what I'm saying? And like he said about talents and gifts, how do we bring programs that cultivate that outside of the school as well? You know, that's something that need to be tapped into. And we need to start doing that as a community and stop depending on these entities and start doing the work ourselves. That's the challenge that I'm trying to do as an individual and bring to the table, as opposed to just always looking to the structure. You know, get away from the structure and create our own structure. You know, like you said about the churches, that's some of the things the church is supposed to be to the community. You're supposed to work hand in hand with the community. You're supposed to be invested in each other, as opposed to being dependent on the government or the system. So that's the challenge that I'm trying to do, following in Tim's footsteps. Because if I didn't encounter this individual, we come from the same neighborhood, so he put me in a certain path and then he set me on another path. So and I'm glad to be here and, you know, and see this, you know, manifest itself, because we brainstormed a lot. Think tank and all kind of stuff, and just to see it come to fruition, it's invigorating to me, you know?
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, so, 2 hands here.
I have a son that was also in juvenile hall for about a year. And I remember, you know, as a mom, always trying to give him, a single mom, always trying to lead him in the right direction. I always felt like alone. You know, all the advice I could give him was not helpful enough to prevent those things from happening. And so I was always reflecting back on like, what made me walk a straight and narrow, and why is it not happening with my son? And I remember growing up in the era of like the crack, you know, era where everybody was around my neighborhood smoking little pipes in the alleys. I'm like, what are we doing? And it wasn't long before I figured out what was happening. Fortunately enough, the school that I went to, it's now called Johnny Cochran, but back in the 80s it was called Mount Vernon Junior High School. And fortunate enough, somebody, not the teachers, but you know, somebody thought, this is happening in the community, let's get some people from I don't know, some drug substance programs in there to talk about intervention. And I remember, to this day, I'm 49, and I remember exactly like the 3 people that were there. There was a Latino man, African American person, and I think it could have been a Caucasian person, lighter person. And I still clearly remember them talking to intervention, you know, about the drugs. And I remember thinking like, okay, you know, it stayed with me. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a teacher, it wasn't my parents doing that. It was somebody in the community that looked like me. And I remember that it really got imprinted in me, like, this stuff really is harmful. And luckily, like, the timing was perfect. I was seeing it in my alley, and the intervention was there. And so I'm wondering, do you guys ever get the opportunity to go into middle schools, elementary schools? Because like as a mother, like I said, I've always took my job very serious with my son, and I really always feel like I'm just not reaching him. I'm not reaching him. And I always felt like, well, what helped me? You know, and how come I was able to evade those situations, and how come that didn't happen with my son? And to this day, he's only 19 years old. It's been a struggle to keep him out of those systems. And looking back, like I said, to me, it was the timing was perfect at that school where I have nothing but good memories of that school. Now it has such a bad reputation, but I have nothing but good memories of that school. But especially, like I said, there was community services or interventions brought into the school, where it wasn't just like the learning of the U.S. history or whatever it is. It was learning about issues that impacted me, that I was seeing in my alleys, in my community. And I think that that was helpful to me. And I'm wondering, do you guys ever get the opportunity to go into the elementaries or the middle schools?
The quick answer for me is no. The long answer is there are still like organizations and church individuals who have the privilege to go inside schools, but what a lot of them individuals don't know about school is, it is against the law for somebody that has been convicted of a felony to be on school campus. So unless you get special permission, you're not allowed by law to do it. And those administrators who are aware of that and don't want that component in their schools, they prevent it. So the way that, to make that easier, especially, from the generation that you come from, and that's kind of like my generation, and I went to Mount Vernon. So Mount Vernon was cool back in the day, and they had programs like that, is to become a voice of change, because that is one of the systems and institutions that is responsible, unfortunately, for sending some of our kids to be born to prison, because there is a similarity between the structure of school and prison, and it is not an accident. I mean, the schools that we primarily go to, black and brown folks. I mean, the schools that the lighter version of kids go to, they look a little different than ours, but if you pass by schools nowadays, you can literally imagine what a 12-foot gate around the school would make the school look like if it didn't already have one. So it's important for the communities that have schools to be vocal, saying that this is a component that we need and that will change the culture.
And hence, school to prison pipeline,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I haven't had the opportunity to. Like Tim mentioned, I was aware that with criminal background, right, that yeah, we weren't allowed in school properly. But I would love the opportunity in the future to explore that and to have a chance to go and share my story.
You got to glazed over just a little bit. I'm an educator, and so I'm thinking about how my school resembles a prison. And the school to prison pipeline, like my students, they line up every day to go in class. They have to ask to go to the bathroom. They cannot leave the classrooms. Even something as simple as getting water. Like it's a struggle to not feed into a prison mentality in the classroom. So in what ways can we restructure the education system and leave a more punitive approach and still discipline our students, but not have it look exactly and mirror the prison industrial complex? Because we are setting our kids up, black, brown, and yellow kids, to flow right into the prison pipeline. Even the way that we discipline them, immediate suspensions, expulsions, there is no other systems of help or resources. How do we change this so we can catch it earlier?
The problem is one of a large magnitude, because it really starts at home. And the homes that we come from are struggling in terms of structure. Even the good homes that we come from are struggling, because if there's a two-parent household, chances are both of the parents are always working to maintain the household, so the kid doesn't have that nourishing environment that sends them to school healthy. They're sent to school with a psychological need and an attraction to belonging to something. And that something can be either good or bad. And we use that term, the school to prison pipeline, all the time. And it's not only because schools are built and structured and disciplinarian just like prison. The school to prison pipeline, the seed for it is the number of words that kids can pronounce when they're young. And there's a disproportionate number of words for kids that never have those encounters to the ones that do. And what's that associated with is the more words you know, the more active your brain is, the more you're able to describe visuals, the more you're able to process feelings. So some of our kids are saddled with being in the 3rd or 4th grade and have only experienced 30 to 40,000 words in their life. And believe it or not, there are other kids that are the same age in the same grade but go to different schools that have been exposed to millions of words. And that is the difference, because the more information that you can import and process, the broader your vision is in actuality and like inside your head. Did I answer that good enough?
I wanted to offer another suggestion in response to your question about like what can we do to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. And one of the most the success stories that I've heard are organizations that work on restorative justice. And one in particular is Our Joy. It's called Our Joy, and it's in Oakland. And I think Our Joy is an acronym for Restorative Justice in Oakland Youth, maybe. and it's run by Fania Davis, who's the sister of Angela Davis. And the reason I mention this is, this is one way to think about, right, disciplining children. So, because you talked about how do we discipline children, but without the sort of punitive, retributive element. And I think restorative justice is predicated on this idea that you bring people together who are involved in some kind of offense, right? Perpetrator, quote unquote perpetrator, of course that's not good language, right? And victim, right? And that the community comes together to restore things, right, to their former state. And that if you have a version of this that can be implemented in schools, then children are being taught to restore, right, to one another, as opposed to you've been bad, we're gonna punish you, and then guess what, you end up in prison. So I would strongly recommend for anybody who's involved in education to look up Our Joy, and other organizations doing restorative justice programs in schools. And I believe Our Joy was adopted by the Oakland School District at one point, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I did wanna kind of piggyback on that, so I also work for a school, I'm a social worker, and so I think that I work for a charter school, and it's an independent study charter school, so we have a lot more flexibility than sort of like your traditional, the traditional school. So we do try to integrate more of a restorative justice sort of mindset, and if a student, shows up on campus, with something that they shouldn't have, so they show up on campus with, with drugs, or they're caught, or
state and federal right now. And I have a nephew who at 16 was charged as an adult. He's now 39, so he's now been in jail longer than he was ever on the streets. But he's been going to parole hearings for the last few years, so we feel like he may be getting out soon. But he's been in jail a long time, and I don't know that I'm equipped to take care of him. I take care of him while he's in jail, so I suppose he would, be looking for that same thing when he got out. But I really feel going to jail at 16 and being tried as an adult, he really hasn't had a chance to process and mature and, grow. So I was wondering about the halfway houses. Are they automatically given an opportunity to go to a halfway house, or is that something that I have to advocate for?
I think in the board process, I don't know if it still exists, but they're mandated to provide a transitional housing place, right, as part of the parole plan. And that was the condition when I went to parole board. I don't know if it still exists today.
Jabbar, Tim, either you want to comment on this?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Taing. So I'm former incarcerated too. So I could relate to what you're saying, like about your nephew. Because at age 17, I committed a heinous crime, and I was sentenced to 61 years and 8 months to life, and I served a total of 22 years and 6 months. So I'm not sure if your nephew is going to parole here under SB 260, because that's what I parole under. So some of the challenge that I encountered when I came out, like you said, your nephew at a young age, being away for certain amount of extended amount of time, it's difficult. So when I was released, yeah, it was tough, right? And part of my condition was being placed in a transitional housing for like 6 months, right? But for me personally, the whole 6 months, it's good and bad, right? It's bad because I'm currently under deportation right now. I never became a U.S. citizen. When I came to this country at 8 years old from Vietnam, I was just a green card permanent resident. So when I committed a crime, when I went to prison, and same day I parole, I detained me. They tried to send me back to Vietnam for 8 months. They detained me for 8 months after I parole from state prison. And Vietnam didn't accept me back. So they have no choice to release me, right? So when I was in immigration, I was like doing research, what could I do, like up on my release. And the transition out didn't really help me in that aspect, but it did help me like in terms of like self-help program. Because when you're in a transition house, you kind of like have to do the program that's there at the specific transition house, which is helping you with like the way you think, how like could help you better adjust to society, right? So in terms of that, it do help, right? I'm sure your nephew is a U.S. citizen, so I'm pretty sure like
Well, I have several, and he is a U.S. citizen, but the other 3 are not, and we've always worried about that because they've been in and out of jail all their life. I have a lifer who doesn't have paperwork, but I'm wondering, like, how do they know? Because it seems like there's quite a few people who go in that the system never really finds out that you're not legal. So how do they know?
They know. They know. Because even the state or the federal, they have a system with ICE, kind of like they have a little contract on what they got going on. But when you get close to parole, I use myself as an example, right? Like when SB 260 passed in 2014, they knew I was gonna go up for parole soon, right? I didn't know that, but they know in advance. So one day they sent me a waiver. They want me to sign to say, well, if I ever get parole from prison, ICE will come detain me, right? This is almost like 3 to 4 years before my parole hearing. I didn't even know, no clue what's going on. So I was like, I signed it. I don't care, because in my mind that time, I thought I would never get out of prison. So they have that information beforehand. So if they want to detain you, more than likely they will let your nephew and them know, like, you're gonna be detained by ICE the same day you parole.
Did you, but they're supposed to give that to you, or did you have to say, go to your counselor and say, I need a transitional house, I don't have anywhere to live, or what do they do?
One of the things they do try to, advocate for us that do go in front of the parole board is to have like some form of, I guess parole plans. So you reach out to these organizations, you know, that have these type of transitional housing, so they know that's readily available to you. And like you said prior to, it's mandated by the parole board that you do transition into the transitional housing so you can get acclimated back into society. Cause they know there are a lot of pitfalls for a lot of individuals, especially when you spend that duration of time in prison. So they try to alleviate that by providing transition housing and mandating. But for individuals that doesn't spend, you know, a duration of time, they don't have that in place. But now they're starting to integrate that as we speak more so than they did prior to kind of like offset recidivism. You know, so that's not a concern, trust me. I'm in a transition right now, support the house, all right, as we speak, so.
Thank you. So if I could just see all the hands so we can kind of come around. So we'll move around this way. So we'll start with you and then work our way around.
I think, the number one problem starts at home. Like, majority of my life, even as a young child, I've always had a problem with, people saying in the community that, parents did the best that they could. So, like he was saying, some parents are gone, two parents have both have a job and they're trying to, meet, you know, requirements to make everything okay at home. So you already know you have these kids, so it's your responsibility, to make sure you make that time. Because, I got in trouble a lot as a youth, a lot as an adult, I'm still in transition with those things. And, the number one reason of why I was in all of this, period from the start is because I wasn't paid attention to as a child. So I did what I wanted to do. I had a situation like the lady said, I brought a blade to school, I was at a party, and then I brought it the next day, and I was passing it to give it away.